What's up, guys? Shi-Nu here. Figured I'd come on here and talk about a bunch of stuff again. Talk a little bit about the herbivore men's, a little bit about American men. A problem that we're having here as well is it started back when the war ended, basically. Before that, we had a lot of men. I might even say it went back as far as the end of the samurai. In the late 1800s, they started taking samurai swords, and basically in that time, in the 1800s, Japanese men were very proud, very strong, very manly, and when they started taking their swords, it kind of they not only took their swords, but they cut their hair. And in the samurai culture, it's followed over into the sumo culture. When they retire from sumo, they cut their hair. You might know that there's a big piece of hair that comes up on the top of their head. When they cut that, they've actually become retired. And when you take a samurai sword and you take his hair, which they did all the time, they would actually cut it with their sword. It basically emasculates them. So I think that's where it started, basically at the late 1800s. But they were still very manly. The fathers would, tell their sons, manly things, And what happened was, after the war, they stopped doing that. And the mothers started to more and more coddle their children, and especially the boys. And now a problem that we're having here in Japan that also probably has a lot to do with the culture as well, of women not wanting to be with men and men not wanting to be with women, is they're like grown children, basically. They're like 35-year-olds, 40-year-olds that still act like they're 10. They go to their mommy's house every day for dinner and stuff like this, and it's a big turnoff for Japanese women. But also the mothers will raise the Japanese children, the daughters, to take care of the men and to coddle the men and coddle their own children and things like that. But the men will be raised to be more. They're going to be caregivers, but they're very childlike. So even though they're grown, that's kind of why our manga culture and cartoon culture has been so prevalent here, because a lot of the Japanese men are very childlike. Now the problem with that is that a lot of the women don't want to be with a boy, basically, and have a little childlike husband. And also the men tend to find a girl, bring them home to the mom, and the mom will basically make them not want to marry the son, because they'll try to pick at the girl and find out, like, if she can take care of the son like she does. And if she can't, then they try to get them to leave their son alone. So it's making it harder and harder for that reason. Now the problem that I think we're going to have here, that this is my idea that I think will happen eventually. Right now, the laws for somebody to come and live in Japan, to like immigrate here, is strict, and they got stricter in 2012. Well, the problem I think they're going to have is the industry is going to start to fail here, like Toyota and Kawasaki and all these companies. They're going to start to fail because there's something here where Japanese men can actually adopt a grown child, because in many cases a lot of Japanese men that have companies don't have children, and they don't have anybody to leave their company to. So what they do is they will adopt a grown man, and they leave the company to his son, which isn't his son, it's his adopted son. But typically that's the adoption culture here in Japan, so they'll adopt a grown-up for that reason. Now, this is going to cause a problem, because as the culture starts to age and there's less and less children, we're going to have so many older people that aren't working, and so many young people, not enough to actually pay into the culture that needs to pay for the older people, you know, like the income tax and the things that you have to pay for older people, basically. And you're not going to have anybody to do that, and the industries aren't going to have workers. So a lot of places are going to start to close. Now, another thing that's happening is I live here in the Itaiado area, and not very far from me is a place called Suma. Now, Suma, they've just said, they came out in the newspaper about a month and a half ago and said, at the current rate of people leaving Suma, because there's not a lot of work there, it's kind of by the beach, and it's a really beautiful area. There's very expensive houses there, but every year people leave, and there's so much people leaving, and there's so many houses over there that are vacant and abandoned, that they are saying in about 20 years there won't be a Suma. That Suma is actually going to be an abandoned ghost town. So everybody's going to be leaving there. There's not schools there. There's very few schools, very few children, and that's part of the reason why. A lot of the families that have married have left there and went to other places like Osaka, and came into Kobe and stuff like that, and moved into town to be closer to a school, because in some cases, like I've told you in another video, they might be coming from 5 miles away to go to this school that's right here by my house. So if they're way, far away from a school for their children, like a daycare or a kindergarten or something like that, they may move someplace closer to that, so that they don't have so many trouble with bringing their kids. They want to be able to walk their kids or take their kids on the bus to the schools. So this is becoming a problem as well. So I think many places are going to be like this. They're going to start having trouble with many companies closing. You might even have a problem with big companies like Toyota and these places. But what I think is going to happen is it's going to get to a point where they're going to have to open up their immigration, and they're going to start doing all kinds of programs. I would imagine sometime in the next 20 years they're going to start opening up the country to bring in foreigners, because lots of these herbivore men aren't going to want to marry Japanese women, and they're just going to kind of grow old and then die off, and they're not going to have sons to teach the herbivore lifestyle to, and they're just going to kind of die off. But when that happens, the country is going to become basically the population, like I had said in another video, they're talking about in like by 2060 there's going to be 1/3 of the population gone. So we're talking 40-50 million people dead, and that's just at the current rate. If it escalates and gets worse, it'll be quicker and much more. It could be 2/3 of the country. And what's going to happen if that happens is there's not going to be anybody here to work. A lot of the companies are just going to die off. There's not even going to be work for the people that live here. So if they open up the immigration, what's going to happen is a lot of the Japanese women are going to start marrying foreigners that have came in. And when they've done that, the population of Japan is going to basically get diversified, and it's going to stop being Japanese. It's going to start being like part Japanese, part French, and stuff like that. And basically this country is going to turn into something like, maybe like England or America. It's basically going to become not really Japan. It's going to become another society, and it's going to basically diversify into like blacks marrying Japanese women, and pretty soon the country is going to look completely different if this happens. Women here want to find a man, because here's the thing, like I have a friend who introduced me to this woman, and she has this little coffee shop where she makes these little things for people's hair and things that go on the wall, and they're basically little pieces of wire with glue, some kind of like a model glue, and she stretches it between the wires, and then she paints it. And she wants like these huge amounts of prices for this crap. Basically, it's just junk. And she's got it's kind of like a restaurant. Well, her husband is Japanese, and he speaks French, and he opened up a French restaurant, and he's got a real restaurant. You know, he's making good money. So she wanted something to do, so she opened up her little shop. And this is a common thing in Japan. She's not really making any money at that place, not enough to warrant her having this place. So her husband is having to pay for his place and her place so that she can play at having a business. You know, this is something that commonly happens in Japan. And basically what happens in Japan is a lot of women will have to work until they find a husband, which is why they want to kind of find a husband. And they don't mind working until they're about 20s, 30s, late 20s, early 30s. But then they want a husband and they want kids. So they have to try as best they can to find a husband because they want to retire and they want to live off their husband's wealth. And this is a common thing. It doesn't happen just in Japan. This is America too. A lot of women want to be able to find a husband. That's why they're so interested in finding a husband with a good job. Well, the problem that we have here because of this is, like I was saying in the other video about college. It's much more hard here in Japan if you go to just public schools and regular things. They consider people that go to public schools stupid, and they say that their parents are poor. You know, if you go to a public school. So you want to be able to put your kids into school that's like a paid school, like this school here. So if you put them in a public school and they go to like a public daycare and then they go to a public high school and then they typically can't, because of where they went to school, it's very hard for them to go to college. And if they want to go to college, they would have to go to like a foreign country like America or Germany or some other country, which is why you see a lot of Japanese people going to other countries for college. So what happens with that is most people, because of the lifestyle and because of the way they were raised like that, don't have the money. That's why they didn't go to the schools. So they can't afford to go someplace else. So you end up with lots of Japanese women and Japanese men being in sales positions. They're basically in the service industry, and they're not going to make any money, which means it's very hard for them to find a wife or a husband too, because nobody wants to marry them. Now, it's easier for the woman to find a husband, obviously, but it's going to be harder for a man to find a wife because he's not going to make any money. In the service industry in Japan, they'll be lucky if they make $30,000 or $40,000 a year, you know, and that's not very much money for a Japanese wife, obviously, you know. So yeah, this is something that's a big thing happening here. So basically the women want to be able to find a husband so that they can retire and live off of his wealth. And that's pretty much every country, I think. You know, most women want to find somebody, but they're not going to be able to find anybody because not a lot of people are able to afford anymore to send their kids to these good schools. And with less and less children being born, there's going to be less and less opportunity for these women to find stuff like this. And they're basically, I've seen a lot of these, people are so off the mark. I watched a video the other day from Think Tank, from the TYT network, and they were talking about the herbivore men. And they were saying how they've got this thing stuck in their head, even in Japan, where they think the reason why there's herbivore men is because men are too shy to go up and talk to a woman. And I think any MGTOW guy will tell you that's not the case. You know, there's a lot more to it than that, and it has nothing to do with the fact that you can go down to a bar in Japan anytime you want and talk to a girl and get laid that night. You know, so it's not that they can't talk to a woman. It's that they don't want to talk to a woman because of everything else that goes along with that. You know, so that's you know, there needs to be a lot of clarification there, because they've got this idea that this is the cause of the MGTOW men when it's 70% of the population. You know, I told somebody the other day in a comment, it's basically like driving down the highway in your car and your car breaks down. So you stop and you get out, and you have a tire that's flat or low on air. So you get out and you start changing the tire. and you don't even notice that the block you've blown a rod in your block, and the guts are puking out all over the ground, and the motor's broke, but you're worried about fixing a tire that doesn't matter. And that's basically this whole thing. They've got a huge problem here in Japan that's going to kill the country. And instead of trying to find out what's wrong, they just say, oh, they're just shy. They're just little whiny men that can't find a woman, or can't talk to a woman. And they just try to talk down to them and belittle them. And by doing that, they're making more MGTOW guys, you know. They're making more of these men, more of these herbivore men by doing that. So they try to shame them into having a wife, which, does that sound like that would work to you? To shame somebody into getting a wife, you know? To see a friend that doesn't have a wife, so you call him names so that he goes and finds some girl to marry. That doesn't sound like it'd work to me. But that's what they've got going on here. They think they can do that. They think by shaming a man about him not being with a woman is going to make him want to go get a woman. And that's not the case, you know. But they don't ever sit down and ask them, why are you MGTOW? Why are you herbivore? You know, they don't ever sit down and ask them. They just come up with these ideas about why they think that's the problem, you know. And I had another guy comment on my video about it's probably due to the teachers in schools not teaching the children, because they spend most of the time with them, you know. But this is the thing in Japan. They have a very closed system here. It's kind of like the horses with the little deals on the side. They've stayed the same in the way they teach since the war ended in the 40s. They don't change their ways of teaching. When they teach them English, they act like English and Japanese are the same language. So that's why many Japanese children have been learning English since they were in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, all the way up through high school. But they can't speak English, but they have better grammar than me, you know. And they can spell, and they can, you know, they can do all this stuff. They can read, but they don't have any reading comprehension. So they can read something, they can spell check it, all that stuff, but they have no idea what they just read or what it even means, you know. And this is a common problem, you know, that they have here, and this is the way they teach everything. Like a typical problem that you'll have with Japanese people speaking English, and the reason why they do it is because they teach English with katakana. Now, katakana is a language in Japan that is used for foreign words. It's the reason why you'll hear Japanese people say starto, you know. They don't have an R. They don't have an L in Japanese. They have an R, which is pronounced as an L, which is why when they end up going to a foreign country, they see an L, they'll pronounce it as an R, and they'll pronounce the R as an L. So they get that mixed up all the time. And then in Japan, they have vowels, not like in English. We have a, I, U, A, O in Japanese, you know. But after the a, I, U, A, O, which is the very first thing, the next thing, every letter after that has a vowel. So, and they don't have any hard consonants here. So they don't do t, you know, can't t, you know, things like that. They don't have anything like that. Everything has a vowel at the end of it. So they don't know how to say those hard consonants. So typically everything will have an O at the end of it, you know. And it's really hard for them to think that way. So the way they talk, they'll use that same hiragana, which is our language here. They'll use the same hiragana with the katakana to describe English words, and because they do that, it's typical that most of them can't speak English. All their pronunciation is so poor that you don't understand what they're talking about. Like, I used to always talk about music, which I would talk about like violins and violas. Well, it's the hardest thing for them to do because there's no V in Japanese. So they say bui. They use a B, and they say, even though there's a V wrote, they'll say violin, you know, like I told him, I tried to tell him, like, if you try to say that to a foreigner, they won't know what the hell you're talking about. And if they say V, they say buoy, you know. So I would try to teach them that a buoy is in the ocean and it floats in the water. That's a buoy, you know. So this is the way they basically teach in Japan, and they don't, even if you're an English teacher and you come into their school and you read through their programming and then say, look, this isn't going to work. Your kids aren't going to learn how to speak English. You know, they're not going to learn anything about English if you teach them this way, because most of them can't speak it. You know, they won't want to change it. They say it's worked this long and this is the way we teach it and blah blah blah. But the thing is it hasn't worked. And the reason why I'm telling you this is the same thing that they're trying to do with the herbivore men. They have a problem, but they think they have a solution, but it's not really a solution. And it's basically that old saying of, like, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting the different results, you're crazy. You know. So basically that's what they're doing here. This is the way they do, and it's going to run this country into the ground, because they're not going to be able to fix the herbivore problem, because it's due to the government and it's due to the women, you know, trying to live off of the men. So until the feminists kind of realize what they're doing to the men and how they're emasculating them and living off the wealth and basically using men and acting like they're the victims, until that stops, nothing's going to change in this country. And if nothing changes, there won't be a Japan. I'm saying probably, I would say, the way it's going right now, in 100 years from now, Japan won't even be Japan anymore. That this country will completely diversify, and it'll end up being someplace like Australia. You know, there'll be so many foreigners coming in, kind of like Britain, you know, where there's so many foreigners coming in, and you have like blacks and whites and French and like Austrians, and there'll be so many people coming into the country, and it'll be very rare to see a true Japanese person here in Japan, because all of them will have, they'll have a little bit of an Asian face, but like curly blonde hair, you know, things like that. They'll basically the culture will completely disappear, you know, and I think that's probably what's going to happen. Now also here in Japan, divorce isn't as prevalent here like it is in America. It's almost 1-for-1 in America. You know, almost everybody that gets married after 7 years, especially, is divorced. You know, very few relationships in America, almost none, basically now. I think it's less than 1%, less than 1, basically. That they almost all divorce after 7 years. It's very rare to see a couple in America that's lasted longer than 7 to 10 years. So this is a problem in Japan, because most guys get roped into taking care of women, and that's why they're so interested in finding a husband, because they know they can retire from work, they can have a couple of kids, and then they can just sit back and live off of his wealth and make him become a slave and work to provide for her and the kids, and not really have a life anymore. Basically, that's how it works here in Japan. Once you're married, that's it. You don't have a life. You're done. The men will basically end up being worker bees for the wife, and just basically slaves. That's what a husband is basically in any country, but definitely here in Japan. They're basically a slave. Your job is to work and provide the wife with money, and to take care of her, you know, and the kids. And that's your only job. And if you ever fail at that, they'll divorce you, and then they can still live off of you for the rest of their life, because the government pays for kids in Japan. There's free health care. So as long as they're divorced, they actually get free health care for the children all the way until they're 18. So, and then you'll have to pay for child support. So even though you're divorced, you have to pay. And typically most men who divorced in Japan might have a girlfriend, but very few of them will remarry, basically because they don't have the money to remarry, but they have to work and they have to take care of the kids. So it's really rare for them to remarry again, especially once they've been brought into the fold of the being used by women. You know, they'll end up being slaves to their wives, to their ungrateful wives, and basically, like I told you before, these oniomes, they will, even though you're providing for your wife and you're taking care of her, they'll constantly be like griping at you and yelling at you about things you're doing, and you know, just basically not respecting the husband that's working his ass off and killing himself to provide you with a Louis Vuitton bag and put your kids in these $12,000 a year schools. You're never doing good enough. You know, they always want more. They always want you to give them their money. Like I was saying, the children, the daughters, are raised to cook and clean and do all these things for the husband, so that they can kind of keep him kind of in check. And they realize very quickly, typically women are good at math. That's a known thing. And so the mothers try to instill in the wives to get really good at math, because they want to be able to take care of the money. So when the husband works, he gives his check to the wife, and then the wife pays for all the bills and all the stuff, so that the husband really doesn't know anything. And like I said in another one of my videos, the husband will end up only getting maybe $200 or $300 a month to live off of. The rest of the money will go to this house, and the wife will pay for the home. She'll pay for the car payment, she'll pay for the kids, she'll pay for the daycare, she'll pay for food, all this stuff. And then she'll spend money on herself and stuff like that. And the husband, if he's lucky, he'll get to, go get something for lunch. But he's the one that's working 82 to 90 hours a week, 5 or 6 or even 7 days a week, so that she can do that, and then they're ungrateful at the same time. So that's what the video is about today. Thought I'd just enlighten you guys a little bit more about the herbivore culture and these women that we got going on over here. So if you like the video, share, like, subscribe, and have a nice night. Talk to you guys later.